My name is Dolores Rivera, but everyone calls me Lola. I'm 72 years old, and what I'm about to tell you will change how you think about family forever. 3 days ago, at my grandson Miguel's engagement party, his fiancée Sofia looked me dead in the eye and said with the sweetest smile, "Don't worry about contributing to the wedding, abuela. We know you're on a fixed income." But what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this poor grandmother sitting quietly in the corner had been secretly building something that would shock them all. And when Miguel himself stood up and announced to the entire family, "Grandma can't afford our wedding, so we'll keep it simple," I knew it was time to show them exactly what this old woman could afford. Let me take you back to where this story really begins, because the truth is always more complicated than it appears on the surface. I moved to this country from Puerto Rico when I was 19 years old, carrying nothing but a suitcase and dreams bigger than the mountains back home. My husband Carlos and I worked 3 jobs each, he in construction during the day and security at night, while I cleaned offices before dawn and took in sewing in the evenings. We lived in a tiny apartment above Mrs. Chen's grocery store, where the walls were so thin you could hear every conversation in the building. But we were happy. We were building something. When our son Roberto was born, I made a promise to myself and to God. This child would have opportunities we never had. He would go to college. He would wear clean clothes and eat fresh food every day. He would never know the shame of having holes in his shoes or patches on his jacket. And we kept that promise. Roberto became a successful accountant, married a lovely woman named Carmen, and gave us the most beautiful grandson, Miguel. From the moment that boy took his first breath, he became the center of my universe. I spoiled him, I'll admit it. When he wanted a bicycle, I worked extra hours for 2 months to buy him the best one in the store. When he needed money for college, Carlos and I took out a second mortgage on our little house. When he graduated and wanted to start his own business, we gave him our entire savings, $15,000 that had taken us 20 years to accumulate. "Mijo," I told him as I handed over the check, "this is our investment in your future. Make us proud." And he did make us proud, at least for a while. Miguel's marketing company grew successful. He moved into a beautiful apartment downtown, drove a nice car, wore expensive suits, but somewhere along the way, something changed. The boy who used to call me every Sunday started calling once a month, then once every few months. The grandson who used to spend every holiday at our table started making excuses. "Sorry, abuela, I have a client dinner." "Sorry, I'm traveling for work." "Sorry, Sofia's family is expecting us." Sofia. That's when everything really changed. Don't get me wrong, she's a beautiful girl, tall, blonde, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about money. Her father owns 3 car dealerships. Her mother runs some fancy charity organization. They live in a house that could fit our entire neighborhood inside it. The first time Miguel brought her to Sunday dinner, I knew she was different from the girls he'd dated before. She arrived in a car that cost more than Carlos and I had made in 5 years combined. She wore a dress that probably cost more than our monthly rent. And when she walked into our modest living room, I saw her eyes do a quick scan, taking inventory, calculating worth, filing away information. "What a cozy home," she said with that same sweet smile I would come to know so well. "It's so authentic." Authentic, as if our life was some kind of museum exhibit. During dinner, she barely touched the arroz con pollo I had spent all afternoon preparing. She pushed the food around her plate and made polite conversation, but I could see her checking her phone under the table. When Carlos told one of his stories about the old days in Puerto Rico, she nodded and smiled, but her eyes were glazed over with boredom. After they left, Carlos and I sat in our kitchen, not saying what we were both thinking. "She seems nice," he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Sigh," I agreed. "Very nice." But nice wasn't the word I was really thinking. The word I was thinking was calculating. Over the next 2 years, as Miguel and Sofia's relationship grew more serious, our relationship with our grandson grew more distant. Family dinners became rare occasions. Phone calls became brief check-ins, and when they did visit, Sofia always had suggestions. You know, abuela, you should really think about downsizing. This house is so big for just 2 people, and the neighborhood, well, it's not as safe as it used to be. Have you considered one of those nice senior communities? My grandmother loves hers. They have activities and medical care right on site. Miguel and I were talking, and we think you and Abuelo should enjoy your retirement instead of worrying about maintaining this old house. Every suggestion was wrapped in concern, delivered with that sweet smile, but I heard what she was really saying. We were an embarrassment. Our modest home, our simple lifestyle, our accented English, we didn't fit into the life she was building with Miguel. And slowly, heartbreakingly, Miguel began to echo her sentiments. Abuela, maybe Sofia has a point. You and Abuelo are getting older. Wouldn't it be easier to live somewhere with less responsibility? The house needs so much work. The roof, the plumbing, the electrical. Maybe it's time to think about selling. You could take the money and travel, see the world. Isn't that what retirement is for? Each conversation felt like a small betrayal. This was the boy I had raised, the grandson I had sacrificed everything for, and now he was suggesting we abandon the home where we had built our life, where we had raised his father, where every corner held memories of our journey from poverty to stability. But I said nothing. I smiled and nodded and told them I would think about it, because despite everything, I loved Miguel more than my own life, and I wanted him to be happy. The engagement party was held at Sofia's parents' country club. I had never been to a place like that before. All marble floors and crystal chandeliers, where the waiters wore white gloves and spoke in hushed tones. Carlos and I felt completely out of place in our best clothes, which suddenly seemed shabby and outdated in that gleaming environment. We sat at a table in the back with Roberto and Carmen, watching as Sofia's family and friends filled the room with their laughter and expensive perfume. Miguel looked handsome in his tailored suit, beaming as he introduced Sofia to business associates and college friends, but he barely acknowledged us beyond a quick wave from across the room. That's when Sofia's mother, Patricia, approached our table with that same sweet smile her daughter had perfected. "You must be Miguel's grandparents," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Patricia Whitman, Sofia's mother. We're so excited to welcome Miguel into our family." "The pleasure is ours," I replied in my careful English, the English I had practiced for 50 years, but which still carried the music of my homeland. "I understand you raised Miguel after his parents divorced," she continued, settling into the chair beside me as if we were old friends. "That must have been quite a challenge on a fixed income." Fixed income. There was that phrase again. "We managed," I said simply. "Oh, I'm sure you did wonderfully. Miguel is such a lovely young man, but I hope you won't feel pressured to contribute to the wedding expenses. We know how difficult it can be for people in your situation." My situation, as if being working class was a disease I had caught. "Sofia and I have been talking," Patricia continued, "and we want you to know that we're planning to handle all the major expenses, the venue, the catering, the flowers, everything. We just want you to come and enjoy the celebration." She meant it kindly, I suppose, but her words felt like a pat on the head, a dismissal. "Don't worry your little gray head about the grown-up expenses, abuela. We'll take care of everything." I thanked her politely and watched her glide back to her circle of friends, probably to report on her charitable conversation with the poor grandmother. But the real blow came later that evening, when Miguel stood up to make a toast. The room fell silent as he raised his champagne glass, his face glowing with happiness and wine. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began, his voice carrying easily across the room. Sophia and I are so grateful for all your love and support as we start this new chapter of our lives. He went on to thank Sophia's parents for their generosity, his business partners for their friendship, his college buddies for their loyalty, and then, almost as an afterthought, he gestured toward our table. And of course, I want to thank my grandparents, Lola and Carlos, who raised me with so much love. I know they can't contribute much to the wedding financially. Grandma can't afford our wedding, so we're keeping things simple. But their presence is the greatest gift of all. The room erupted in polite applause, and I felt every eye in the place turn toward us with that mixture of pity and condescension I had come to recognize. The poor grandparents who had done their best but simply couldn't keep up with their grandson's success. Carlos reached over and squeezed my hand under the table. His palm was damp with embarrassment, and I could see the hurt in his eyes. This was the boy we had sacrificed everything for, and he had just announced to a room full of strangers that we were too poor to matter. But what Miguel didn't know, what none of them knew, was that his poor grandmother had been keeping a secret for the past 15 years. You see, while Miguel was building his business and Sophia was planning their perfect life, I had been building something too. Something that started with a single decision I made the day Carlos was diagnosed with diabetes. I was 57 years old, working as a seamstress in a factory downtown, when the doctor told us that Carlos would need medication for the rest of his life. Expensive medication. The kind that could bankrupt a family like ours if we weren't careful. That night, I sat at our kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills, trying to figure out how we would manage. Carlos was sleeping, exhausted from the doctor's appointment and the weight of his diagnosis. The house was quiet, except for the tick of the old clock on the wall and the distant sound of traffic on the street outside. I looked around our modest kitchen, at the table Carlos had built with his own hands, at the curtains I had sewn from fabric remnants, at the photographs of Miguel covering the refrigerator door, and I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to learn about money, real money. Not just how to stretch a dollar or clip coupons, but how to make money work for me the way it worked for people like Patricia Whitman. The next day, I went to the library and checked out every book I could find about investing, about the stock market, about building wealth. I read about compound interest and dividend yields and portfolio diversification. I studied the financial pages of the newspaper like other people studied the sports scores, and slowly, carefully, I began to invest. It started small, $50 here, $100 there. Money I saved by walking to work instead of taking the bus, by making my own lunch instead of buying it, by mending clothes instead of replacing them. I opened an account with a discount brokerage and began buying shares of companies I understood: the grocery store where I shopped, the phone company we used, the bank where we kept our savings. Carlos thought I had lost my mind. Lola, Mija, we don't know anything about the stock market. That's for rich people, not for people like us. But I was determined. Every month, I took a portion of my paycheck and invested it. I reinvested the dividends. I researched companies and read annual reports. I learned to read financial statements and understand market trends. And slowly, incredibly, my little portfolio began to grow. $1,000 became $2,000. $2,000 became $5,000. $5,000 became $10,000. I didn't tell anyone, not Carlos, not Roberto, certainly not Miguel. This was my secret project, my insurance policy against the uncertainties of life. If Carlos got sicker, if I lost my job, if Miguel needed help with something important, I would be ready. But as the years passed and my investments continued to grow, something else began to happen. I started to enjoy it. I enjoyed the research, the strategy, the quiet satisfaction of watching my careful choices pay off. I enjoyed the feeling of control it gave me, the knowledge that I was building something substantial with my own intelligence and discipline. When Carlos retired, I told him we had enough savings to be comfortable. When Miguel needed money for college, I told him we would manage somehow. When he wanted to start his business, I said we would find a way to help. But I never told them about the portfolio that was now worth more than $100,000. By the time Miguel graduated from college, my investments had grown to $200,000. By the time he started his business, they were worth $350,000. And by the time he got engaged to Sophia, my poor grandmother portfolio had reached $500,000, $500,000, built one careful investment at a time, one dividend payment at a time, one reinvestment at a time, hidden in plain sight while everyone around me assumed I was just another struggling retiree living on Social Security. But the money wasn't the real secret. The real secret was what I planned to do with it. You see, I had always intended to leave everything to Miguel. He was my only grandchild, the continuation of our family line, the boy I had raised and loved and sacrificed for. In my mind, every dollar I invested was really an investment in his future. But as I watched him grow more distant, as I listened to Sophia's subtle suggestions about our lifestyle, as I felt myself being slowly erased from his new life, I began to have doubts. Did Miguel really need more money? He was already successful, already living comfortably. Would inheriting my portfolio make him happier? Or would it just make him more like the people who looked down on families like ours? And more importantly, did he deserve it? The engagement party was my wake-up call. Sitting in that country club, listening to my grandson announce to a room full of strangers that his grandmother couldn't afford his wedding, I realized that Miguel had already made his choice. He had chosen Sophia's world over ours, chosen status over family, chosen embarrassment over love. But I wasn't angry. I was disappointed, yes, but not angry, because I understood something that Miguel didn't understand yet. Money doesn't change who you are, it reveals who you are. And Miguel had revealed himself to be someone who was ashamed of where he came from. So I made a new plan. The wedding was scheduled for 6 months after the engagement party. 6 months of watching Sophia plan her perfect day, while making it clear that Carlos and I were charity cases to be managed rather than family to be celebrated. She would call occasionally with updates, always delivered with that sweet condescension I had come to expect. I found the most beautiful venue, Abuela. It's a little expensive, but don't worry. Daddy's taking care of everything. The dress is going to be stunning. It's from this designer in New York. I know it's more than you probably spent on your entire wedding, but Miguel insisted I have the best. We're having the reception catered by the same company that did the governor's daughter's wedding. The menu is going to be incredible. Probably not the kind of food you're used to, but I think you'll enjoy trying something new. Each conversation was a small humiliation, a reminder that I didn't belong in their world of expensive tastes and unlimited budgets. But I smiled and nodded and told her how excited I was for their special day. Meanwhile, I was making preparations of my own. I met with my financial advisor, a sharp young woman named Jennifer, who had been managing my portfolio for the past 5 years. Jennifer was one of the few people who knew the truth about my financial situation, and she had helped me navigate the complexities of wealth management with discretion and skill. "Mrs. Rivera," she said as we sat in her office overlooking the city, "are you sure about this? It's a very generous gift, but it's also a very large portion of your portfolio." "I'm sure," I told her, "but I want it done exactly as I've described. The timing is crucial." Jennifer nodded and began preparing the paperwork. She had worked with wealthy families before, and she understood the dynamics of money and power and family relationships. She also understood the importance of making a statement. 2 weeks before the wedding, I received a call from Miguel. It was the first time he had called me directly in months, and I could hear the stress in his voice. "Abuela, we have a problem. The caterer is demanding full payment up front, and Sophia's dad is having some cash flow issues with one of his dealerships. We're short about $25,000. $25,000. The amount Carlos and I used to make in an entire year. What are you going to do, mijo? I asked. I don't know. We might have to cancel some of the arrangements, maybe find a cheaper venue. Sophia is devastated. This was supposed to be her dream wedding. I could hear the panic in his voice, the fear that his perfect life was about to be exposed as less perfect than it appeared. Maybe I can help, I said quietly. Miguel laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Abuela, I appreciate the thought, but this isn't something you can fix with a few $100s. We need serious money, and we need it fast. How much do you need exactly? I told you, 25,000. But don't worry about it, we'll figure something out. What if I told you I could help? There was a long pause. Abuela, I love you, but you live on Social Security. You can't even afford to contribute to the wedding in the first place. This is way beyond anything you could handle. His words stung, but they also confirmed what I already knew. Miguel saw me as a burden, not a resource. A problem to be managed, not a person to be respected. You're right, mijo, I said. I'm just a poor old grandmother. What could I possibly do to help? The wedding day arrived with all the pomp and circumstance that Sophia had dreamed of. The venue was a historic mansion on the outskirts of the city, with manicured gardens and a ballroom that sparkled with crystal and gold. The guest list included politicians and business leaders, society matrons, and country club royalty. Carlos and I arrived early, dressed in our best clothes, the same clothes we had worn to the engagement party, because they were the only formal clothes we owned. We were seated at a table near the back of the reception hall, along with a few other relatives who didn't quite fit into Sophia's vision of elegant sophistication. The ceremony was beautiful, I'll give her that. Sophia looked like a princess in her designer gown, and Miguel looked handsome and proud in his custom tuxedo. They exchanged vows under an arch of white roses and baby's breath, promising to love and honor each other for the rest of their lives. I cried during the ceremony, but not for the reasons people probably thought. I cried for the little boy who used to sit on my lap and ask me to tell him stories about Puerto Rico. I cried for the teenager who used to help me in the garden and dream about his future. I cried for the young man who used to call me every Sunday just to hear my voice. That boy was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. The reception was everything Sophia had planned: elegant, expensive, and exclusive. The food was exquisite. The music was perfect. The decorations were worthy of a magazine spread. And throughout it all, I watched my grandson play the role of the successful young husband, charming his new in-laws and impressing his wife's friends. He barely spoke to Carlos and me all evening. A quick hello when we arrived, a brief introduction to a few people who clearly had no interest in meeting us, and then he was off to more important conversations with more important people. But I wasn't hurt anymore. I was ready. During the dinner service, as the waiters were clearing the main course and preparing for dessert, I stood up from my table. The movement caught Miguel's attention from across the room, and I saw him frown slightly, probably worried that his embarrassing grandmother was about to make some kind of scene. I walked slowly to the front of the ballroom, my heels clicking on the marble floor. The room gradually fell silent as people noticed the elderly Latina woman making her way to where the bride and groom were seated at the head table. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "I hope you don't mind if I say a few words." Sophia looked mortified. This wasn't part of her carefully orchestrated plan. Miguel looked confused and slightly panicked. But Patricia Whitman, ever the gracious hostess, smiled and gestured for me to continue. "Thank you," I said, turning to address the room full of elegant strangers. "My name is Dolores Rivera, but most people call me Lola." I am Miguel's grandmother, the woman who raised him from the time he was 7 years old. I paused, letting my words sink in. I could see Miguel shifting uncomfortably in his chair, probably wondering where this was going. I want to tell you all a story, I continued. It's a story about a young woman who came to this country with nothing but dreams and determination. A woman who worked 3 jobs to put food on the table and clothes on her family's backs. A woman who sacrificed everything so that her grandson could have opportunities she never had. The room was completely silent now. Even the waiters had stopped moving, sensing that something important was happening. That woman, that was me, and for 50 years, I have worked and saved and invested every penny I could spare, not for myself, but for my family, for my grandson's future. I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope, thick, cream-colored paper with Jennifer's law firm letterhead. Miguel, I said, looking directly at him. You said your grandmother couldn't afford your wedding. You were right. I couldn't afford this wedding. I could see the confusion in his eyes, the embarrassment at having his family's financial limitations discussed so publicly. But what you didn't know, I continued, is that I could afford something much better. I handed the envelope to Sophia, who took it with trembling fingers. Open it, mija, I said gently. Sophia's hands shook as she broke the seal and pulled out the documents inside. Her eyes widened as she read, and I watched the color drain from her face. What is it? Miguel asked, leaning over to look at the papers. It's a stock portfolio, Sophia whispered. Worth $500,000. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. I heard someone say, "Did she say 500,000?" And someone else whisper, "The grandmother?" Miguel stared at the documents as if they were written in a foreign language. I don't understand. Abuela, where did this come from? From 15 years of careful investing, I replied. From buying shares of companies instead of buying new clothes. From walking to work instead of taking the bus. From making my own lunch instead of eating out. From living below my means so that I could build something substantial for your future. I turned to address the room again. You see, I learned a long time ago that there are 2 kinds of wealth in this world. There's the wealth that comes from having money, and there's the wealth that comes from building money. I may not have been born with the first kind, but I spent 50 years creating the second kind. Patricia Whitman looked like she had seen a ghost. The woman she had dismissed as a poor grandmother on a fixed income had just revealed herself to be wealthier than most of the people in that room. But here's the thing, I continued, my voice growing stronger. This portfolio was always meant to be Miguel's inheritance. Every dollar I invested, every share I bought, every dividend I reinvested, it was all for him, because I loved him more than my own life. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. But love isn't just about giving, it's also about respect. And respect isn't just about money, it's about recognizing the value of the people who love you, regardless of how much money they have. I looked directly at Miguel, seeing the shame and confusion in his eyes. Mijo, you have spent the last 2 years being embarrassed by your grandmother. You have made it clear that my simple life, my modest home, my accented English, that these things don't fit into the world you want to build with Sophia. Miguel started to protest, but I held up my hand. Let me finish. You announced to a room full of strangers that your grandmother couldn't afford your wedding. You were right. I couldn't afford this wedding, but I could afford to give you something much more valuable. A foundation for your future, built with love and sacrifice and 50 years of careful planning. I turned to Sophia, who was still staring at the portfolio documents with wide eyes. Sophia, mija, this is my wedding gift to you. Not because you deserve it, but because Miguel deserves a wife who understands the value of family, who understands that wealth isn't just about what you inherit, but about what you build, who understands that respect isn't something you give only to people who can afford expensive things. I reached into my purse and pulled out a second envelope. But I have another gift as well. This envelope was addressed to Miguel, and I handed it to him directly. Open it, I said. With shaking hands, Miguel opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. As he read, his face went through a series of emotions: confusion, shock, and finally, devastation. "What is it?" Sophia asked. Miguel's voice was barely a whisper. It's a letter from Abuela's lawyer." "What does it say?" Patricia demanded. Miguel looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "It says that the portfolio was my inheritance. Was, past tense, but because of my behavior, because of how I've treated her, she's donating it all to charity instead." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. I heard someone gasp, "She's giving away $500,000? And someone else whisper, "To charity?" "That's right," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the noise. "The Dolores and Carlos Rivera Foundation for Educational Opportunities. It will provide scholarships for young people from working-class families who want to go to college but can't afford it. Young people like Miguel used to be before he forgot where he came from." Miguel was crying now, real tears streaming down his face. "Abuela, please, I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." "I know you didn't mean to, mijo," I said gently. "But you did hurt me. And more importantly, you hurt yourself. You chose to be ashamed of the people who love you most. You chose status over family, appearance over substance." I looked around the room at all the elegant faces staring at me in shock. "Let me tell you something about wealth," I said. "Real wealth isn't about how much money you have. It's about how you treat the people who helped you get where you are. It's about remembering where you came from and honoring the sacrifices that made your success possible." I turned back to Miguel and Sophia. "You wanted a wedding that would impress all these important people. You got it. But you paid for it by losing something much more valuable: the respect and love of the woman who raised you." I picked up my purse and prepared to leave. "Abuela, wait," Miguel called out, standing up from his chair. "Please, can we talk about this? Can we fix this?" I stopped and looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the little boy I had raised, the teenager I had guided, the young man I had supported, but I also saw the person he had chosen to become. "Miguel," I said, "some things can't be fixed with money. Some things can't be fixed with apologies. Some things can only be fixed with time and genuine change." I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking on the marble floor. The room remained silent except for the sound of my footsteps and Miguel's quiet sobs. But just before I reached the door, I turned back one more time. "Sophia," I called out, "the portfolio I gave you, it's real. $500,000 transferred into your name as of this morning. Consider it a wedding gift from a grandmother who understands the value of family even when her own family doesn't." The shock on Sophia's face was worth everything. She had spent 2 years treating me like a charity case, and I had just given her more money than her father made in 2 years of selling cars. "But remember this," I continued. "That money came from the hands of a woman you looked down on. It came from the sacrifices of people you considered beneath you. It came from love you didn't think was worth respecting." I looked at Miguel one last time. "When you're ready to remember who you really are, mijo, when you're ready to honor the people who made your success possible, you know where to find me. I'll be in the same house where I raised you, in the same neighborhood you're now embarrassed to visit, living the same simple life that apparently doesn't fit into your new world." And with that, I walked out of the ballroom, leaving behind a room full of shocked silence and a grandson who finally understood what he had lost. Carlos was waiting for me in the parking lot, sitting in our old car with the engine running. "How did it go, mi amor?" he asked as I got into the passenger seat. "It went exactly as it needed to go," I replied. As we drove home through the city streets, past the neighborhoods where we had built our life together, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I had spent 50 years building wealth in secret, not for myself, but for a grandson who had grown ashamed of the woman who raised him. But in the end, I had used that wealth for something much more important: to teach a lesson about respect, about family, about the difference between having money and understanding its true value. Miguel would have to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. He could continue down the path he had chosen, surrounded by people who valued him only for his success and his ability to fit into their world. Or he could remember the lessons I had tried to teach him about love and loyalty and the importance of honoring the people who sacrifice for your dreams. Either way, he would have to make that choice without my money as a safety net, because some lessons can only be learned the hard way. 3 months have passed since the wedding, and I haven't heard from Miguel. Not a phone call, not a visit, not even a text message. I know from Roberto that he and Sofia are doing well. They used part of the portfolio money to buy a bigger house in an even more exclusive neighborhood. They're living the life they always wanted, surrounded by the kind of people they think matter. But I also know from the same source that Miguel hasn't been sleeping well, that he's been asking questions about my childhood, about the early days when Carlos and I were struggling to build our life in America, that he's been looking through old photo albums and asking his father to tell him stories about the grandmother he thought he knew. Maybe he's beginning to understand what he lost. Maybe he's beginning to remember who he used to be before success and status became more important than family. Or maybe not. Maybe he's decided that the price of my love was too high, that the expectations of respect and loyalty were too demanding for his new life. Either way, I'm at peace with my decision. I spent 50 years building wealth for a grandson who forgot the value of the woman who raised him. In the end, I used that wealth to give him something much more valuable than money, a chance to remember who he really is. The foundation is thriving. We've already awarded our first round of scholarships to 12 young people from working-class families, kids who remind me of Miguel when he was young and hungry and grateful for every opportunity, kids who understand that education is a privilege, not a right, and who won't forget the people who helped them achieve their dreams. And every time I sign a scholarship check, every time I see the gratitude in a young person's eyes, every time I help someone build a better future for themselves and their families, I remember why I started investing in the first place. It was never really about the money. It was about building something that would last, something that would make a difference, something that would honor the sacrifices of everyone who came before. Miguel may have forgotten that lesson, but these young people haven't. They understand that success isn't just about what you achieve. It's about how you use that achievement to lift up others. And that, more than any portfolio or inheritance or wedding gift, is the real wealth I wanted to pass on to my grandson. Whether he ever understands that or not is up to him. But I know that somewhere out there, 12 young people are getting the education they deserve because their grandmother, a woman they've never met, a woman who was dismissed as too poor to matter, decided that respect and gratitude are worth more than money. And that's a legacy I can live with. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see other stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.